Confessions of a Former Prostitute.
Do you believe that hell is just a metaphor or a terrifying reality that few know about? Today, you will hear a story so profound that it could change your view of everything you thought you knew. Imagine a place where the fire never goes out, where despair is so intense that it seems to consume even the soul. A place of incessant screams, suffocating darkness, and endless pain. We're not talking about just any nightmare, but about a destiny that many ignore until it's too late. I didn't believe in hell, at least not literally, until a series of events led me to the abyss and what lies beyond it. What I am going to reveal now is not just a testimony. It is a journey that crosses the limits of the physical and takes us to the spiritual. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to face your worst fears, the consequences of your choices, in a place where there are no second chances? This is my story. A life marked by choices that took me away from the light and threw me into the depths of darkness. But before you judge me, I want you to listen to me, because this story could be the answer to the deepest questions in your heart. The truth about hell is not something I read in books or heard in sermons. It's something I experienced. Hell, as I discovered, is more than fire and suffering. It is a state of complete separation, a void where all that remains is regret and pain. It is a place where the screams of desperate souls echo eternally, and God's silence is the greatest torment. Did you know that even the smallest choices, the ones we consider insignificant, can take us down paths we never imagined? That's exactly what happened to me. For years, I lived in what felt like control of my life, but in reality, I was being manipulated by forces I didn't even know existed. These forces led me down a path of destruction, marked by the incessant search for pleasure, success, and acceptance. But all of this had a price, and I paid dearly. While I shared the fleeting glory of this world, I ignored the signs my soul gave me. I walked away from what was most important, believing I was in control. But hell showed me how wrong I was. When everything collapsed, I found myself at rock bottom, where I discovered that what we were experiencing here was just a reflection of what awaits us. But you might be wondering, how did someone like me get out of this darkness? And more importantly, what did I really see in hell? What revelations brought light to my path and can light yours too? These answers are here, and I need you to stay with me, because what I saw and heard is something the world needs to know. The truth is that hell is not a place reserved just for great sinners. It is a subtle trap, which lures us with empty promises and traps us before we realize the error. What I am about to share with you is a spiritual revelation that goes far beyond what you imagine. Every detail, every scream, every shadow I saw in that place remains with me like a constant warning. But this is not a warning of doom. It is a call to reflection and change. So I ask you, are you prepared to face the truth about hell? Are you ready to understand the consequences of the choices we make every day? What I'm going to tell you next is a testimony of transformation, pain, and hope. You won't want to miss what comes next. And before continuing, I want to invite you to something very special. If you feel like you are facing spiritual battles, or if you know someone who needs help, leave your prayer request in the comments. No matter what you are going through, God hears every prayer, and together we can intercede for each other. Prayer has the power to transform, to bring light where there is darkness and hope where everything seems lost. Praying is more than words. It is an act of faith, a moment of connection with God, in which we surrender our pains and requests into His hands. Maybe you feel like your life is out of control, or that there are areas where you need release and peace. Believe me, prayer can be the beginning of powerful change. Therefore, I encourage you, write your prayer request, and I, together with the entire community here, will intercede for you. If this message is touching your heart, take this moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here we share stories of transformation, spiritual revelations, and teachings that can change lives. Every like and subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear this truth. And don't forget, activate the bell to receive notifications and not miss the next videos, because what I'm going to reveal below is just the beginning of a journey that could impact your life in ways you never imagined. Leave your prayer request and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Let's seek light and transformation together. My life, like many others, felt like an endless search for something I couldn't define. Looking from the outside, perhaps you would just see a woman living freely, enjoying life and taking advantage of the opportunities that came her way. However, behind this facade of glamour and self-sufficiency, there was a lost soul, slowly sinking into an abyss of emptiness and pain. I wanted to be accepted, loved, admired, and to achieve that, I made choices that took me down a path from which I didn't know if there was a return. It all started with small, almost imperceptible decisions. What seemed to be an alternative to escaping everyday problems or overcoming old traumas ended up becoming a pattern of behavior. I sought to fill emotional gaps with the attention of other people, with money, parties, and fleeting moments of pleasure. It was a life that, on the outside, shone, but on the inside, only accumulated darkness. Maybe you felt something similar, that feeling that, no matter what you do, nothing seems to be enough. I used to tell myself that I was in control, that everything was my choice. But deep down, there was something I couldn't admit. Each decision was taking me further and further away from who I really was. I ignored the warnings, the little signs that life gave me that something was wrong. Even the people closest to me tried to warn me, but I was so obsessed with building a false version of happiness that I couldn't listen. I closed myself off in my own world, denying that anything was wrong and believing that the answers lay in the next relationship, the next party, or the next day at work. Yet every step I took towards this lifestyle took me further away from something bigger, something I barely knew existed, but somehow missed. It's funny how we are often so busy filling the void with passing things that we don't realize what we're really missing. For me, this emptiness was the absence of a spiritual connection, something that I only came to understand much later. As the years went by, I began to feel the weight of my choices. Although I continued to live as if everything was fine, deep down I knew something was deeply wrong. It was as if I was surrounded by an invisible darkness, a feeling that I was being watched, judged, and that something was about to happen. Have you ever felt this? That nagging feeling that there's more going on around you than meets the eye? I ignored it, trying to convince myself it was just paranoia or tiredness. But the consequences began to appear, one by one. My body began to show signs of wear and tear. My mind was in constant torment, and my soul seemed to scream for help. What once gave me pleasure began to turn into something I feared. The parties, the empty relationships, the easy money, it all became a constant reminder of the hole I was in. What was once a quest for freedom had become a prison, and I was my own jailer. The scariest moment, however, was when I began to realize that I was not alone on this path. I don't mean that in the sense of people around me, but of something darker, something that I felt was a constant presence. It was as if every wrong choice I made was attracting something invisible but real. I started having frequent nightmares, strange visions, and moments where I felt like I was being suffocated by an invisible force. I know this may seem like an exaggeration or a figment of my imagination, but what happened next proved it was something much bigger than I could understand. This feeling of being accompanied by something, of being in a constant state of alert, began to consume my peace. I felt like I was being pulled down to a place I couldn't escape. It was at that moment that I realized I was at a point of no return. Everything I had built up in my life, the image of independence, the illusion of control, was crumbling before my eyes. I was alone, empty, and completely exposed to the reality I had ignored for so long. But what scares me most looking back is how innocently it all started. They were small decisions, attitudes that seemed insignificant at the time, but that opened doors to something I never imagined facing. Today, as I share this part of my story, I wonder how many people are living exactly the same cycle without realizing what they are attracting to themselves. Have you also been ignoring signs? Are you making decisions that seem harmless, but that could be taking you down a path of no return? Leave it here in the comments if you've ever felt something like this. Write, "I understand," if you can identify with this story in some way. Your interaction here is important, not just for me, but for creating a community of people seeking answers and, above all, transformation. This is just the first part of my journey. What came next was an experience that changed my life forever. Stay with me, because what I'm going to reveal next is something you need to hear. The crisis that changed everything. Everything seemed like just a sequence of endless, meaningless days until something happened. It was as if life had suddenly decided to force me to face everything I had been ignoring for years. Have you ever had a moment when it feels like the ground disappears beneath your feet? When all your certainties, all your escape mechanisms simply collapse? That's exactly what happened to me. It all started with something small, a situation that, for anyone else, might not have had a big impact. But for me, it was the beginning of a breakdown. It was as if the universe was conspiring for me to face the consequences of my choices. First, I lost something that I thought was the pillar of my life, but which was actually just another illusion. Then, people around me started to disappear, either moving away or abandoning me emotionally. Each loss felt more painful, more suffocating, until I found myself completely alone. Loneliness is a treacherous feeling. At first, it disguises itself as freedom. You think you're in control, that you finally don't need anyone. But over time, she turns into a monster that consumes everything around her. I spent entire nights awake, surrounded by thoughts that seemed to come from a place that wasn't mine. It was as if voices were whispering in my ear, reminding me of every mistake, every failure, every wrong choice I had ever made. They told me there was no going back, that I was destined to live in the chaos I created. And then the worst came. It wasn't a physical experience, but something so profound that it felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. One night, after a particularly difficult day, I lay in bed, but something was different. As soon as I closed my eyes, my body felt heavy, as if I was being pulled by invisible forces. I was awake, but it was like my mind was being transported to another place. Have you ever had the feeling of falling into an endless abyss, where every second seems eternal? That's exactly how I felt. Suddenly, I was enveloped by a darkness so intense it seemed alive. It was not just the absence of light, but an oppressive, suffocating presence. I couldn't breathe properly, I couldn't move, and all I heard was screaming. Screams that came from all sides, but at the same time seemed to echo inside me. These screams were not just of physical pain, they were of despair, of souls who had lost all hope. Little by little, I began to see shapes around me. Shadows that moved, figures that writhed in suffering. It was at that moment that I realized where I was. I didn't know how, but I was experiencing a fraction of hell, and it all felt as real as the life I had lived up to that point. The smell of sulfur was suffocating. The flames that I saw in the distance did not illuminate, but seemed to consume everything around. It was as if every part of this place was designed to amplify the torment. And that's when I heard it. I don't know how to explain exactly what it was, but a voice, firm and imposing, cut through the sound of screams. She didn't speak to me directly, but what she said was like a sword piercing my soul. "You chose to be here." Those words echoed in my mind over and over again, as if they were an accusation but also a warning. In that moment, my entire life flashed before me. Every decision, every path I chose to take, was there, wide open, as if I was being forced to watch my own trial. What scared me most was realizing that there was no one forcing me to be there. Everything I had done had led me to exactly that place. I thought I was in control of my life, but in reality, I was being guided by something much bigger, something I had completely ignored. After that, I started hearing whispers. It wasn't the same voices that screamed in despair, but something much more frightening. They were words that I didn't fully understand, but they seemed to carry a clear message. I wouldn't get out of there. It was at that moment that panic took over me. I wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but it was as if my entire being was trapped, unable to react. This experience seemed to last an eternity. Every second in that place was a torment that I cannot completely describe with words. All I could think was, how did I get here? What did I do to deserve this? And most importantly, is there still a way out? That's when suddenly the darkness began to change. I won't talk about it now, because that's something I'll reveal later, but what happened next is what completely transformed my outlook on life, death, and everything beyond that. If you have ever experienced a crisis in your life that made you question everything, leave the word "I understand" in the comments. Or if this story is impacting you in some way, write "I'm here." Your engagement is important because by sharing our experiences, we create a connection that goes far beyond what we are experiencing at the moment. What I'm going to tell you in the next topic is what really changed everything, and you won't want to miss it. The supernatural experience, the descent into hell. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but in that instant, in the midst of darkness and despair, my mind seemed completely aware that something beyond human comprehension was unfolding. It was as if I had been ripped from my body and thrown into a place that didn't follow any of the rules I knew. The sensation was that my entire being, not only physical, but my essence, my soul, was being sucked into an endless abyss. What surrounded me was more than the absence of light. The darkness seemed to have texture, as if it were alive, enveloping my body and mind in a suffocating way. It was as if every particle of that place carried pain, fear, and despair. I couldn't breathe normally. Each inhale felt like a fight against something invisible that was squeezing my chest. Everything around seemed to whisper, but I didn't understand the words. These sounds weren't random. They had an energy, a malice that I felt deeply. Suddenly, the whispers turned into screams. These were no ordinary human screams. They were different, deeper, as if they came from something that was broken, something that had no hope left. Each scream was like a blade cutting through my soul, and I knew instinctively that these sounds were of eternal suffering. It was impossible to ignore the fact that these screams were coming from souls, like mine, who were trapped in that place. With each step, I was taken deeper. There was no visible path, but it was as if I was drawn forward with no choice. The ground felt uneven, but at the same time it was warm, as if I was stepping on something that was alive and in agony. There was a constant smell of sulfur, but it was mixed with something I couldn't identify. A smell that brought up painful memories and emotions I thought I'd buried. And then I started to see. At first they were just shadows, but gradually figures began to form. I saw beings that weren't human, but weren't completely alien either. Their forms were distorted, as if their very essence was a reflection of all that is corrupt and evil. There was something familiar about them, something that made my stomach turn, like they were a reflection of the worst parts of myself. These beings moved slowly but with purpose, and when they looked at me, because I felt their eyes, even though I couldn't see them clearly, it was as if they saw directly into my inner self. The place, in itself, was a manifestation of pure torment. I saw rivers of fire that illuminated nothing, but burned incessantly. Each flame seemed to scream on its own as if it were alive. There were prisons made of what looked like flesh and stone mixed together, pulsing as if they were a living organism. Inside these prisons, I saw people, or what was left of them. Some writhed in pain, others seemed completely empty, as if there was nothing left inside them but eternal emptiness. I began to realize that this place wasn't just physical. It reflected something deeper, something I vaguely understood while I was there. Every aspect of that hell seemed to be a direct response to everything these souls, and I, had done in life. There was no judgment or explicit explanation, but what was happening was clear. This was the consequence. It was the result of decisions that seemed small but carried spiritual weight. I felt crushed by the weight of this place. It was as if every memory of mistake, every wrong choice I had ever made, was being thrown at me at the same time. I could hear voices laughing, mocking, but also crying, begging for something I knew would never be given. The anguish was palpable, a constant energy that made every second feel like an eternity. The worst moment was when I started to feel like this wasn't just a vision. Hell was beginning to shape me, to transform me. I felt like parts of me were being ripped away, that something was trying to destroy who I was to turn me into another one of those formless shadows, forever trapped in that cycle of pain. The feeling was that I was losing my humanity, my soul. In the midst of all this, I asked myself, why me? Why was I being made to witness all of this? But at the same time, a small part of me knew the answer. I knew this wasn't random. Everything had a reason, a purpose. The question was, what would I do with this experience? As I struggled to understand what was happening, I realized there was something more deep in the darkness, something even darker, more terrifying, and I was being taken directly there. That was when the voice I heard before, that voice that said I had chosen to be there, echoed again. This time she said something different. You still have a choice. If you've ever had a dream or experience that seemed so real that it changed the way you see the world, tell me in the comments. Write, I felt, or I have lived to share your story. I want to hear how you connect with this, because what comes next is something that has never left my mind, and I'll reveal it all in the next few moments. You won't want to miss what's coming up. Revelations in Hell. What I saw and heard. As I was dragged deeper and deeper into that place, something began to change. Not in the environment around me, which remained as oppressive and terrifying as before, but within me. It was as if I was being forced to face truths that for so long I chose to ignore. Each step seemed heavier, and at the same time, more inevitable, as if I were following a path that had already been traced by the choices I made throughout my life. There was something cruelly logical about that hell. He wasn't just a punishment, he was the direct consequence of everything we were, of every selfish thought, every hurtful word, every act of pride and lack of compassion. This was not something arbitrarily imposed, but something that we ourselves built, brick by brick, with our decisions. Every corner of that place seemed to have been shaped by the lives of the souls that were there, including mine. It was as if it reflected, amplified, everything we carried inside. As I walked, or rather was pushed through that scenery, I began to notice details that I hadn't noticed before. There was a weight in the air, something almost tangible that pressed on my shoulders and made every movement difficult. It was as if the environment itself was alive, as if it fed on the suffering, guilt and regret that overflowed from every soul present there. And then the revelations began. At first, they came as whispers, indistinct and fragmented, as if someone were telling me secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. Then these whispers became clearer, more direct, and what I heard hit me like an avalanche. They were truths that I never wanted to face, but that, at that moment, were impossible to ignore. Truths about how much my choices had taken me away from the light, about how my pride and my lack of forgiveness had turned me into a prisoner of my own darkness. I remember a specific phrase that echoed in my mind, coming from I don't know where. Hell begins when you move away from what gives meaning to your existence. These words shook me to my core, because I knew deep down they were true. I spent my whole life looking for meaning in the wrong things, in people, in money, in momentary pleasure. And in the process, I distanced myself from something much bigger. At a certain point, I started to see figures in the distance. They were people, or what was left of them, trapped in endless cycles of pain and regret. Each of them seemed to be reliving over and over the darkest moments of their lives, as if they were unable to escape their own mistakes. There was something desperate about this, because it was impossible not to ask myself, was I also doomed to this fate? And then something even more terrible happened. Among these figures, I began to recognize faces. Some were from people I knew, others were from complete strangers, but they all shared an expression that left a deep impression on me. It wasn't just pain, it was the complete absence of hope, as if nothing could save them from that place. This realization hit me like a punch in the stomach, because until that moment, I still had a small spark of hope inside me. But now, seeing those lost souls, I began to wonder if that spark was just an illusion. The voices which had previously whispered now seemed to speak directly to me. One of them, in particular, was clearer, more authoritative. She said something I'll never forget. "You built your prison with your own hands. Now you have to face it." Those words echoed inside me, like a hammer hitting my soul. I knew they were true, but I also knew I needed to fight it. Among all these revelations, there was one message that stood out, like a ray of hope amidst the chaos. You can still choose. I don't know where this message came from, if it was from my mind, from something or someone in that place, but it was what kept me standing, even when everything around me seemed to be trying to destroy me. Hell, as I have come to realize, is not just a physical place. It is a manifestation of everything we choose to ignore, everything we avoid facing, everything we choose to prioritize over what really matters. It is, above all, a reflection of ourselves, our flaws, our insecurities, and our deepest fears. While I was there, I saw and heard things that I will never be able to fully describe. But what struck me most was the clarity with which hell exposed the truth about myself. It was not just a place of torment, but a mirror that showed, without filters, who I really was. If you have ever had a moment in your life when you felt like you were facing the direct consequences of your choices, write "I lived it" in the comments. Or if you've ever felt stuck in a cycle that seemed impossible to break, write "I'm trying to change." Your interaction is very important, not only for me, but for everyone who is here seeking reflection and transformation. What comes next in this story is something even deeper and more revealing. You need to know what happened next, because these revelations changed everything. The divine presence in the midst of darkness. When it seemed like there was no way out, something changed. The darkness around me, which until then had been so overwhelming and oppressive, began to behave strangely. It was as if the environment itself was reacting to a force I couldn't understand. The screams in the distance began to diminish, almost as if they were being silenced by something bigger, something that went beyond that place. It was at that moment that I felt a change within me. Despite all the pain, fear, and torment I had experienced, one thought began to emerge. I was still alive. There was something in me that resisted that chaos, something that didn't allow me to be completely consumed by it. Suddenly, I noticed a light. At first, it was just a distant point, almost imperceptible amid the immensity of darkness that surrounded me. But as I stared at it, the light began to grow. It was no ordinary light. She didn't just illuminate. She radiated something I can only describe as peace, something that seemed to penetrate the deepest parts of my being. That light was not just visible, she was felt. Every fiber of my body, every piece of my soul reacted to it as if it were an ancient memory, something I knew but had forgotten. As the light approached, I realized that the whispers and voices that had previously seemed inescapable were now fading. Those grotesque shadows that moved around me began to retreat, as if they were repelled by the presence of that light. It was as if, for the first time, the power of the place I was in was challenged. as if the very essence of that hell was being challenged by something much greater. It was then that I realized that light was not just an energy or a phenomenon. She had a presence, a consciousness. It was not something, but someone. And when that someone approached, everything around me changed. The light revealed more than I could have imagined. She showed me not only where I was, but also who I was. In the face of this presence, all my masks fell. There was no hiding anything. There was no pretending. I was completely exposed, but at the same time, I felt no judgment or condemnation. On the contrary, I felt something I had never experienced before. Pure, absolute, unconditional love. I knelt, not because I was forced, but because it was the only possible response to that presence. Tears started streaming down my face, and I didn't even know exactly why. Maybe it was for relief, for pain, or simply for the certainty that finally I had found something that was real, something that was not temporary, that did not depend on circumstances or my actions. The presence began to speak, but not as you might think. There were no audible words, but I could feel each message clearly within me. The first thing I heard, or felt, was something that changed everything. I was always with you. Those words hit me like lightning. I, who had spent so long feeling abandoned, alone, lost, now knew that even in my worst moments, I was never truly alone. This presence continued to reveal things to me about my life, things that I had tried to ignore or forget. I saw moments from my childhood when I felt a pure connection to something bigger, but that was slowly lost as I grew up and let the world shape my priorities. I saw choices I made, moments when I turned my back on what was good, all in the name of a false sense of freedom and control. But at the same time, this light showed me that there was still hope. She wasn't there to condemn me, but to rescue me. I realized that even in that place of torment, there was a way out. It wasn't an easy way out, and it wasn't something I could simply achieve on my own. It was something that required surrender, a complete letting go of everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I controlled. As that presence remained with me, I felt something I will never forget. It was as if all the wounds, all the pain that I had carried for years were being washed away. It wasn't a comfortable process. On the contrary, it was painful to face everything I had accumulated throughout my life. But at the same time, it was liberating. Every weight I released seemed to be replaced by something lighter, purer. I don't know how long I spent there in front of that light, but every second was transformative. I knew there was still a lot to face, a lot to understand. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. There was something different about me, something that presence had left. It was as if a seed had been planted in my heart, a seed of faith, hope, and love. If you have ever felt at any point in your life as if a light was trying to reach you, even in the midst of darkness, write "I believe" in the comments. Or if you have ever had a moment when you felt the presence of something greater carrying you when you needed it most, write "I felt it." Your engagement is important because by sharing our stories, we help others find the strength they may be looking for. What happened next is what truly sealed my transformation. And I need you to stick with me because this journey is not over yet. The return and transformation. As the light began to fade, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Part of me wanted to stay there forever, in that moment of such deep connection. But another part knew that wasn't possible. That divine presence had shown me something that changed everything about me, but it had also given me a calling. It was not to remain in that state, but to return, to take with me what I had learned. However, I didn't know what it would be like to return, or if I would be able to carry the weight of everything I had seen. It all happened as suddenly as it began. In an instant, I was standing before the light, feeling its infinite peace and love. The next moment, I was thrown back to reality. My body felt heavy, as if I was carrying all the physical and emotional pain I had accumulated over the years. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was in the same place as before, but nothing was the same. Darkness still loomed around me, but there was something different inside me. It was as if a small flame had been lit, fragile, but enough to illuminate the shadows that once swallowed me. The first thing that came to mind upon returning was urgency. I needed to change. I needed to correct the tortuous paths I had taken, but I also knew that it would not be an easy journey. The weight of my past was there, reminding me of every mistake, every choice that brought me to that point. However, something had changed in how I viewed these memories. Before, they were like chains that bound me. Now, they were lessons, reminders of what I didn't want to be again. In the days that followed, I felt the internal struggle begin. It was as if two forces were competing within me. On the one hand, there was that flame of hope that the divine presence had planted in my heart. On the other, there were the voices of fear, of doubt, trying to convince me that it was too late, that I had no salvation. Have you ever felt this way? Like you're stuck between who you want to be and who you were? This battle seemed endless, but something in me told me not to give up. It was then that I started to notice changes. These were not immediate or miraculous transformations, but small adjustments that began to shape my heart and mind. I remember one night, as I was reflecting on everything that had happened, I heard a voice inside me, soft but firm. Trust. It was such a simple word, but so powerful. It resonated with me like a call, a clear instruction for me to hand over my pain, my fears, and my weaknesses to the one who had rescued me. This confidence, however, did not come easily. It was like learning to walk again. I had to force myself to let go of the control I believed I had over my life and allow something bigger to guide me. And as I did that, I started to see results. These were not great achievements or external changes, but small internal miracles. I began to feel peace in situations that would have previously caused me anxiety. I began to see purpose in things I previously despised. The biggest transformation, however, was the way I started to see the people around me. Before, I saw them as resources, things or people who could offer me something I wanted. Now I saw them as souls, as beings as fragile and complex as me. This changed everything. I began to feel compassion, something that before seemed so far from my reality. I realized that just as I had been rescued, these people also needed a chance, a light in their lives. While this process was happening, a constant thought tormented me. I needed to tell my story. Not so that people would feel sorry for me or admire me, but because I knew there was something universal about my experience. How many people live without hope, trapped in cycles of pain and regret, believing there is no way out? How many people carry within themselves the same emptiness that I carried for so many years? I knew I couldn't keep all of this to myself. That's when I started praying, something that, until then, was completely foreign to me. My prayers were not elaborate or full of beautiful words. They were simple, sometimes confusing, but genuine. I asked for strength, I asked for guidance, and above all, I asked that that flame inside me not go out. Little by little, these prayers began to shape me, to strengthen me for the mission I felt had been placed before me. If you have ever been through something that completely changed the way you see life, write "I changed" in the comments. Or if you feel like you are looking for a transformation, something that shines a light in the midst of darkness, write "I am looking." Your testimony could be the inspiration someone needs to keep fighting. This is just part of the journey. Transformation is not something that happens all at once. It's a process, a journey. And in the next few moments, I will share how this journey took me to places I never imagined. So stay with me, because what comes next is something that could transform not just my story, but perhaps yours as well. Lessons for daily life. As I began to rebuild my life, I realized that the revelations I received in hell and during my transformation were not just for me. Every vision, every word, and every moment of pain and redemption were messages that needed to be shared, not as a distant story or an extraordinary tale, but as lessons applicable to anyone's life. I understood that, like me, many live in cycles of choices that, even seemingly harmless, have profound and eternal spiritual consequences. These lessons did not come easily, but they were engraved on me like marks that will never be erased. One of the first things I understood was the importance of small choices. Before, I lived believing that only big sins or big decisions had an impact on my life. But what I learned in hell was the opposite. Every decision, even the smallest ones, like an unkind word, a proud thought, or an act of indifference, contributes to shaping who we are. Those souls I saw, trapped in endless cycles of pain and regret, were there because they had ignored those small choices. This completely changed the way I started to live my day-to-day life. I realized that every attitude matters. Every word that comes out of our mouth can make or break us. I started paying attention to the way I treated the people around me, from those closest to me to those who, in other times, I wouldn't even notice. I began to realize that a simple act of kindness, a word of encouragement, or even a smile can have a profound impact on someone else's life, and mine too. This change in perspective made me understand that living with purpose is not about accomplishing great things, but about being present and aware in each moment. Another lesson that left a deep impression on me was the issue of pride. During my experience, it became clear that pride is one of the biggest traps we face. It blinds us to the truth, makes us believe that we don't need help, that we are in control, when in fact, we are just moving away from what gives us true peace. I spent years of my life feeding my ego, believing that I could solve everything alone, that I didn't need anyone, much less God. But the experience in hell revealed that this pride was what imprisoned me the most. I learned that true freedom comes with humility, accepting that we cannot carry everything alone, that we need each other, and above all, that we need something bigger than ourselves is liberating. I began to practice what once seemed impossible, asking for forgiveness, admitting my mistakes, and most importantly, forgiving. It wasn't easy. Forgiving, especially those who have hurt us deeply, is one of the greatest challenges we can face. But in doing so, I realized that forgiveness is not just a gift to another. It is a gift to ourselves. It frees us from the chains of the past and allows us to move forward. I also understood the power of genuine repentance. Before this experience, I thought of regret as something painful, almost like a punishment. But what I've learned is that repentance is actually an invitation. It is an opportunity to start again, to abandon what weighs us down and prevents us from living fully. I began to see repentance as a form of renewal, something that brings us closer to who we really are and who we were created to be. Furthermore, I began to value the present. In hell, time seemed non-existent. Each moment dragged on like an eternity, and it was impossible to escape the past or look to the future. This realization taught me that the present is all we have. Every second is an opportunity to do something different, to love more, to be kinder, to reconnect with God and those who matter. Another crucial lesson was about the importance of faith. I'm not just talking about a passive belief, but an active faith, which moves us to live according to what we believe. I understood that faith is a foundation, something that keeps us firm even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. It's what helps us keep going when we face challenges and gives us hope when all seems lost. Finally, perhaps the biggest lesson was about love. In hell, what struck me most was the complete absence of love. That place was the personification of emptiness, of total disconnection with God and others. When I came back, it was imprinted on me in a way that will never be erased. Love is the most powerful force there is. He is the opposite of hell, the light that dispels darkness. Understanding this made me want to live differently. Not just receiving love, but also spreading it, even in the smallest everyday interactions. If you've ever had a moment when you felt like a small choice changed the course of your life, write "I changed" in the comments. Or if any of these lessons resonated with you in some way, write "I felt this." I really want to know how these reflections touch your life, because by sharing, you can inspire other people to also reflect, and who knows, change their journeys. What I'll share below are the tools I use to put these lessons into practice and how they continue to transform my life. So stay with me, because there is much more to come. The power of faith and prayer. When I started to put everything I had learned into practice, I realized that there was a greater force that supported all the lessons I received: faith. But not a theoretical, empty faith, based only on words that are said without understanding. I'm talking about a living faith, a total commitment that challenged me to believe even when everything around me seemed to be falling apart. It was faith that began to shape the new version of myself, a person who was finally learning to walk with purpose and direction. At first, this faith seemed fragile. She was like a small flame that could be extinguished by the slightest wind of doubt or fear. I had so many questions, so many insecurities, and the battle within me felt uncontrollable. Had God really given me a second chance? Was I worthy of this? These questions echoed in my mind every day, but at the same time, something in me told me to keep going, to trust in something bigger. It was at that moment that I discovered the transformative power of prayer. Before this experience, I saw prayer as something distant, almost ritualistic. I believed it was something that very religious people did, and that perhaps it was just a formality. But as I began to pray, I realized that prayer is not just an act. It is a connection, a direct dialogue with the Creator. And that connection began to change everything. At first, my prayers were simple, clumsy. I didn't know exactly what to say or how to say it. Many times I would simply cry and let my heart speak, and that was enough. I discovered that prayer doesn't need perfect words or well-structured sentences. She just needs sincerity, genuine delivery. It was as if, with every word or thought I directed to God, I was freeing myself from something that held me back. Prayer began to become a refuge. Whenever the weight of my past or fear of the future consumed me, I sought that moment of connection. It was as if I was recharging my strength, reminding myself that I didn't have to face everything alone. And little by little, I began to notice answers. These were not audible responses or miraculous signs as I imagined, but small changes around me and within me. A feeling of peace in the midst of chaos, a strength that seemed to come out of nowhere when I was about to give up. A word of encouragement from someone at the exact moment I needed to hear it. More than that, prayer began to shape the way I saw the world and people. Before, I was so focused on myself, on my problems, that I couldn't see beyond that. But as I prayed, I began to feel a different weight. A weight for the people around me, for the pain and struggles they faced. It was then that I understood that prayer is not just a tool for our own needs. It is an act of love, an act of intercession for those who need it as much as we do. There were times when I prayed for people I didn't even know. I felt such a strong impulse to ask for lives that were as lost as I once was, and that was transformative. As I interceded for other people, I found my pain lessened. Not because my problems ceased to exist, but because my focus had changed. I was learning that the true purpose of faith and prayer is to connect us not only with God, but also with others, like a great chain of love and care. Prayer also taught me about patience. In a world where everything seems to be immediate, where we want quick answers and instant solutions, prayer showed me the value of waiting. I learned that answers don't always come at the time we want or in the way we expect, but they come. And while we wait, we are shaped, strengthened. Every moment of waiting is an opportunity to grow in faith, to learn to trust that there is a greater purpose, even when we don't fully understand it. Faith and prayer also taught me how to deal with doubts. I thought doubting was a sign of weakness, that I wasn't good enough if I questioned. But I have found that even doubts can lead us to a deeper place of faith. It is in the questions that we seek answers, and it is in the search that we find God even more clearly. With each passing day, I realize that faith and prayer are not just tools we use in times of crisis, but a way of living. They connect us to the divine, give us purpose, and help us see beyond our limitations. They remind us that we are never alone, that there is always a hand outstretched, ready to guide us. If you have ever felt that prayer helped you in a moment of pain, or that faith gave you strength to continue, write "I believe" in the comments. Or if you are looking for that connection, if you feel like you need something that strengthens you, write "I am looking for it." Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find hope. And in the next few moments, I will share how these tools of faith and prayer began to transform not only my life, but the lives of people around me. Stay with me, because there is much more to be said and experienced. A call to reflection. With everything I've experienced and the lessons I've absorbed, one powerful truth has begun to stand out above all others. The life we choose to live, moment by moment, is not only a reflection of what we carry inside, but also the seed of that we will harvest one day. This realization made me look at my story with different eyes. Every decision, every word said or not, every opportunity ignored or taken advantage of was there, drawing the path that led me to hell and, finally, to transformation. It is impossible not to reflect on the weight of our choices when we face an experience that exposes our spiritual reality. How many times do we let ourselves be carried away by an automatic routine without thinking about the implications of our actions? How many times do we act on impulse, in the heat of the moment, without realizing that each choice, even the smallest ones, brings us closer or further away from something greater? I did this all the time. My decisions were guided by what was convenient, what seemed easiest, or simply what made me feel good at the moment. But over time, I realized that these choices built invisible barriers between me and God, between me and the life I was supposed to be living. And it's not just what we actively do that shapes us. Often, it's what we fail to do. How many opportunities have I ignored to help someone, to forgive, to get closer to the people who really matter? Looking back, I see that the emptiness I carried was fueled, in large part, by the lack of action. The absence of a purpose, of a true connection with something greater, created a hunger in my soul that I tried to fill with fleeting things. Therefore, today, I feel that I need to extend an invitation to you who are here, listening to my story. An invitation to reflect, pause, question. What are you building with the choices you make every day? Are you planting seeds of love, forgiveness, and connection? Or are you accumulating hurt, pride, and emptiness? Maybe you're so busy trying to survive, trying to fulfill your obligations, that you never stop to think about it. But the truth is that sooner or later, We are all faced with the consequences of what we choose. This reflection is not something that should scare you, but rather awaken you. Just as I was awakened, often painfully, I believe this can be an opportunity for you too. Life, no matter how challenging it is, constantly offers us chances to start over. Even in the most difficult situations, even when we think there is no way out, there is always a door that takes us back to the light. But you have to be willing to look for it, to take the first step. I remember the moment I first realized this. It was as if a curtain had been lifted from my eyes, allowing me to see that I was not trapped by my circumstances or my past. I had a choice. Even in the face of hell, even carrying all the guilt and regret I felt, I could still decide to change. And this is the truth I want to share with you. There is always a choice. No matter how deep you think you've fallen, no matter how far you feel from God, peace, or purpose, there is still a chance for transformation. But this change starts with something simple, yet deeply challenging: honesty. You need to be honest with yourself, look inside, and recognize the areas of your life that need to be adjusted. This is difficult because we often prefer to ignore our failures, placing the blame on circumstances or other people. I did this for years. I blamed the world for my pain, for my losses, for my wrong choices. But the moment I stopped pointing outward and started looking inward, something changed. Change doesn't happen when we blame, but when we take responsibility for who we are and what we want to become. And this is where the most important reflection of all comes in. Where do you want to be in a year, 5 years, or even in eternity? I'm not talking about material achievements or professional achievements. I'm talking about the state of your soul, what you are cultivating within yourself. Are you at peace? Do you feel like you are living a life aligned with a greater purpose? If the answer is no, know that you are not alone. I've felt this way too. And believe me, it is possible to change this story. If you've made it this far, I want to encourage you to do an exercise right now. Close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself, what do I need to change today? It could be something simple, like asking someone for forgiveness, dedicating more time to the people you love, or even setting aside a moment in your day to pray. Start small. Every change, no matter how small it may seem, is a step towards the life you want to build. If you have ever gone through a moment when you needed to reflect deeply on your choices, write "I reflected" in the comments. Or if this story is making you think about something specific you would like to change, write "I will change." I really want to know how you're feeling and what's going through your mind. Your participation is important, not just for me, but for all the people here, seeking inspiration and transformation. In the next moment, we will take another step on this journey, because there is still a lot to be discovered. Don't stop here. Conclusion. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for sharing this moment with me. His presence in this video is no coincidence. Every word that was said, every reflection that emerged, was prepared with the purpose of touching your heart, of reminding you that there is always hope, that there is always a way back. Now, I want to hear from you. How has this message impacted your life? How did she talk to you? Leave the sentence in the comments. I felt God's voice in this video, and share, if you feel it in your heart, how this message connected with your personal journey. Your testimony could be what someone needs to find strength and move forward. Furthermore, I want to invite you to be part of this mission, which goes far beyond a video. By subscribing to the channel, you will be joining a community that seeks transformation, purpose, and reconnection with God. Click on the button "Sign Up" and activate the bell to receive notifications whenever new content is released. This way, you will continue to follow stories and messages that can change lives, including yours. Don't forget to leave your like in this video. This simple gesture helps bring this message to more people, spreading light and hope in a time when so many people are thirsty for answers and direction. You can be part of that by supporting this channel. Last but not least, I want to invite you to watch the next video that is already here, on the final screen. It is a direct continuation of this message, with more reflections and revelations that can transform not only the way you see life, but also the destiny of your soul. May God bless your life powerfully. May He fill you with peace, hope, and purpose. And may you never forget that there is always a way back to the light. Thank you for being here, and I'll wait for you in the next video.